So a few days ago, we got the news that Bagram Air Force Base in Afghanistan, which is, I believe, the U.S.'s biggest base there, it's now empty. So we've withdrawn fully from that Air Force Base. And look, this is good. This means that there is a drawdown going on in Afghanistan. Biden deserves credit for the drawdown. Of course, we need to wait and see just how much of a drawdown there is. Like, is he going to keep some number of contractors on the ground? Is he going to keep some number of residual forces on the ground to train the Afghanistan government? These are all yet to be seen. But listen, you got to be fair. You got to be objective. Credit where credit is due. At least there is a drawdown going on, and it's real. And it's real. We left our biggest base. So that's something that, massive credit for. I don't care if Trump had done that. I would have given him credit for it, but he didn't do it. It happened under Biden. So the media is now taking that story and they're doing what is effectively fake adversarial journalism. And when I say that, what I mean is instead of going after Biden from a pro-peace perspective, from a left-wing perspective, from a non-interventionist perspective, from the perspective of what the American people want, which is to get out of Afghanistan, they do the exact opposite. So what they do is run a bunch of stories about how, oh my goodness, now that we're leaving our biggest base, it's getting messy over there and it's getting ugly over there, and the Taliban has taken over a number of places that they didn't have control of before, and they're basically feeding the narrative that us getting out of Afghanistan is bad and is leading to terrible outcomes. And the underlying implication is the responsible, reasonable thing to do would have been to stay there. Now, notice something. When we're there, they don't do a lot of rigorous journalism and investigative reporting on the ground about all the negative consequences of us being there. They don't really do much of that. They just sort of leave it as is and don't talk about it much when we're occupying the country, as if occupying the country is the default. So now that he's pulling out, they're sort of going after him for beginning to draw down and pull out. So Biden did a press conference for the 4th of July, and the media wanted to ask some questions about this issue of Afghanistan. Let's see how Biden responded.
Could you talk to us about Afghanistan? Is the drawdown going to be done in the next few days?
No. No, we're on track exactly as to where we expect it to be. But I wanted to make sure there was enough, quote, running room that we wouldn't be able to do it all to September. There'll still be some forces left, but it's a rational drawdown with our allies, and it's making, so there's nothing unusual about it.
Are you worried that the Afghan government might fall? I mean, we are hearing about the Taliban is taking more and more districts.
Look, we're in that war for 20 years. 20 years. And I think I met with the Afghan government here in the White House, in the Oval. I think they have the capacity to be able to sustain the government. There's going to have to be, down the road, more negotiations, I suspect. But I am concerned that they deal with the internal issues that they have to be able to generate the kind of support they need nationwide to maintain the government.
I thought on Afghanistan.
I want to talk about happy things, man.
If there is evidence that Kabul is threatened, which some of the intelligence reports have suggested it could be in 6 months or thereabouts, do you think you've got the capability to help provide any kind of air support, military support to them to keep the capital safe, even if the U.S. troops are obviously fully out by that time?
We have worked out an over-horizon capacity that we can be value-added, but the Afghans are going to have to be able to do it themselves with the Air Force they have, which you're helping them maintain.
Afghanistan.
I'm not going to answer any more questions on Afghanistan. Look, it's 4th of July. I'm concerned that you guys are asking me questions that I'll answer next week, but this is a holiday weekend. I'm going to celebrate it. There's great things happening. Economy's growing faster than any time in 40 years.
So, of course, right-wing media is taking that last part where he's like, no, I'm done talking about Afghanistan, let's move on. And they're framing this as like, bah, see, Biden doesn't want to answer tough, fair questions. This is ridiculous. And they're going after him for that. This is an issue where I totally agree with Biden. Listen, he answered a bunch of the questions on Afghanistan, and he basically was like, I don't want to answer these questions anymore. And by the way, the questions are bullshit because they're framed from a pro-war perspective. So let's go through them. The first one is, this one's the most neutral one. This person says, is the drawdown going to be done in the next few days? Okay, so that one's fine. That's fair. I'll give it a pass. It's just a question about what's going to happen. And, I don't even really remember what his answer was, but it's not memorable. Then we get, this is where it gets really bad. Are you worried that the Afghan government might fall? The Taliban is taking more and more districts. So again, you're going to sense the trend here. The trend is, I'm going to ask you a question that implies that, like, you should definitely go back in or be ready to go back in if need be. And listen, I love Biden's response there. He was like, we were there for 20 years. So in other words, it's like, what do you want? What more do you want? What do you want us to do? You want to stay there for 30 years, 40 years, 100 years? You want to spend more U.S. taxpayer money? Is that what you want to do? You want to have more of our men and women die? What do you want to do? Rebuild Kandahar and Kabul instead of Flint, Michigan, which we desperately need to do? So there's a little bit, this is where you start to sense a little bit of a hint of like, fuck off in Biden's voice. Then he's asked another question. He says that Afghanistan basically needs to deal with the internal issues to get the support of the people that they need to maintain the government. That's a very kind way of him saying, we're not going to go back in. I don't want to go back in. This is their problem. And if the government's under siege and they can't maintain control, well, then they should probably do the things that would get them more popular support and control. And by the way, on that front, I think he's totally right. The Afghanistan government, even though obviously they're better than the Taliban, they're deeply corrupt. And so, there's some support among the people for the Taliban, as weird as that sounds. Also, by the way, it's not a pretty picture. We've allied with people there in Afghanistan and Pakistan who are warlords. And a lot of these warlords have child sex slaves. You know how I know that? Our own soldiers blew the whistle on it and said our allies had child sex slaves. So don't ask me to pick between warlords who have child sex slaves, a super corrupt government, and the Taliban. What I'm going to say is, hey, that's their business. I want nothing to do with it. And effectively, that's exactly what Joe Biden is saying here in so many words. And then you get this question. And this one is just, this is laying it all out there. If there is evidence that Kabul is threatened, do we have the capability to provide air or military support? So if the Taliban keeps gaining more and more territory, and eventually it looks like Kabul might go down and be under Taliban rule, do we have the capability to provide any sort of support to the Afghan government to fight back the Taliban? That's the question. And, I think that's where he effectively punts, and he's like, enough. He also said something like, we have the capability to do some value-added capacity. I don't even know what that means, but they should do it on their own, basically. Yeah, listen, I'm totally with Biden on this, because I think these questions are completely illegitimate. Why is every question phrased from like it's so dumb that we're getting out perspective? Why is that the case? Why is every question, it has the underlying assumption that it's our responsibility to make sure that the Afghanistan government stays in the hands of the people we want it to be in? I just think this shows you the problem with U.S. media. They're not adversarial, they're pro-establishment, and whenever they are adversarial, they're adversarial from the right, from a pro-empire perspective, from a pro-war perspective. There's so many good questions you could have asked from a left perspective, from a non-intervention perspective, from a pro-peace perspective. How many times did you guys hear the question asked in our 20 years in Afghanistan? Hey, what even is our goal anymore? When can we declare victory and come home? Like, why are we still there? Because you guys remember, we were told early on in the case of Iraq, it was for Saddam Hussein. In the case of Afghanistan, it's to get Osama bin Laden and wipe out al-Qaeda. Saddam Hussein is dead. Osama bin Laden is dead. and Al-Qaeda is largely decimated in the region. There's less than 100 Al-Qaeda operatives in Afghanistan. That's not me speaking. That's our own intelligence agencies speaking. The Taliban is still there, but the Taliban is more of a guerrilla army. They're interested in their own domestic politics in the region. Now, that's not me saying they're good people, but that is me saying they're not a threat to bomb Cleveland, bitch. So what are we doing there? What are we doing there? And then you get into the real motivations. How many times have you heard a question about, hey, does the $1 trillion worth of mineral wealth that's in Afghanistan, does that have something to do with why we're there? What about the opium? The opium fields that we've literally protected. What about those? Does it have anything to do with the military-industrial complex and the fact that war is very profitable and you have all these Raytheon, Boeing, Honeywell, Halliburton, go down the list. You have all of these corporations that get phenomenally wealthy from us being there. Isn't there a perverse incentive that we're there? How many times have you heard a question about what I just told you guys before, that a lot of the people we allied with are warlords who have child sex slaves? How many times have you heard a question about that? They're never critical from a pro-peace perspective. Ever. Ever. And so this is the kind of stuff that you get. The underlying implication being, well, obviously you should go back in if the Taliban is gaining more and more territory. Obviously you should do that. Nonsense. I mean, can you also turn around and make the argument, well, obviously if warlords with child sex slaves are in control of many of the regions, we should go in and fight the warlords with child sex slaves. But hold on, those are our allies. Those are the people we want to have control over certain areas. So it's almost like we're not doing this for freedom and democracy and human rights and all the nonsense reasons that they give us. So, I mean, I totally side with Biden on this. You know, the polls show the American people want us out of there. We live in what's supposed to be a constitutional republic and a representative democracy. So this is, I would have swatted aside those questions too. Maybe I wouldn't have been as short as he is. I would have been probably more forceful, more aggressive, and I would have laid out the anti-war case better. But yeah, after a while, he was like, enough. I don't want to hear this. He's doing what the American people want on this front, at least in terms of the drawdown. Will he actually fully withdraw? That's yet to be seen. Again, I'm only calling balls and strikes here. I'll let you know where we bottom out in terms of the withdrawal. I'm sure there's going to be some contractors still there. I'm sure there's going to be some people there to help train the Afghanistan government. So that I will criticize if and when we get there. But right now with the drawdown, listen, leaving that Air Force base was a wonderful thing. And instead of the media, you know, reflecting the will of the American people or being critical from a non-interventionist perspective, they're being critical from a pro-war perspective. And it's bullshit. It's bullshit. And by the way, you also see now all of the incentives of the establishment at work. This is why it takes somebody who's actually principled and has beliefs in order to lead. This is why. Because you're going to feel all the pressures to do the wrong thing every step of the way. You know, and that goes for almost every issue. When you're talking about the issue of Wall Street, you're going to have lobbyists, you're going to have donors in the room, you're going to have people telling you, hey, deregulate the shit out of them and bail them out if need be. Let them privatize the profits and socialize the losses. This is your job to represent them like that. That's where all the pressure is. That's what all your advisors will say. And they'll come up with these rationalizations that make it sound like that's the intelligent thing to do. Oh, the economy will collapse if you don't do it, so go ahead and do it. Let them loot the treasury. This is what it is on foreign policy. All of your generals, all of your, you know, most of the time, the intelligence agencies are going to say, stay there. When all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. You're going to have, the media is going to push you in a pro-war direction. The opposition party's going to do that. The other Democratic leaders are going to do that. So this is why it takes a person of real moral character to draw a line and be like, no, you're all wrong, fuck off, and now I'm going to make a proactive anti-war argument. And so, you know, it's funny that they're trying to attack him over this. I mean, he's right. Stop asking shitty questions from a pro-war perspective on Afghanistan. If anything, the real criticism should be, why are we not out of there fully even sooner? And the real question should be, wait, how many residual forces are you going to leave there? How many contractors are going to stay there? How many people are you going to leave there to train the Afghanistan government? How many? How many? And then, you know, if/when Biden answers that, you say, shouldn't you get fully out? Because that's what the American people want to do. And at this late date, do we even have a right to be there anymore? What even is our mission? So the media is terrible. This is a rare instance where I sympathize with Biden. He could have been more forceful to make the anti-war argument, but swatting aside absurd questions like this, totally for it.